Welcome to XM.com. This is a special report, and we'll be having a closer look at the outlook for commodities for 2022. I'm Christina Marujas, and joining me today is lead investment analyst Rafi Boyadjian. As this year draws to a close, Rafi, I think investors are curious on how central bank policies and geopolitics are likely to affect commodities in 2022. So let's start by having a look at the traditional safe haven gold, which failed to gain much on the global growth uncertainty this year. What factors are likely to affect bullion in 2022?
So, Christina, you are right. Gold was unable to repeat the gains this year that we saw in 2020. It's been trading sideways for much of the year, even though the pandemic is far from over and we had plenty of scares and plenty of turmoil in the markets. Gold's underwhelming performance is even more bizarre when you consider the fact that real yields in the US, which are a strong factor in determining the price of gold, real yields have stayed near record low levels, and we have seen inflation soaring everywhere. Now, gold is supposed to be a good hedge against inflation, but we haven't seen it do much as inflation in places like the US has jumped to multi-decade highs. One reason for this is that gold has a bit more competition now when it comes to its safe haven attributes. Investors have been pouring money into cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, as well as, of course, into defensive stocks. A lot of tech stocks, in fact, are now considered to be defensive. And so all these companies have maintained strong earnings throughout the pandemic. Another reason likely play a big role in 2022 is, of course, Fed policy. The Fed has begun to taper its asset purchases and just signaled that interest rates could begin to rise next spring. So the expectations of higher rates in the US and other advanced economies like the UK, Canada, and New Zealand have taken the shine off gold, given that this theme of central banks normalizing policy will almost certainly run through 2022. The prospects for the precious metal aren't looking that great at this point in time. On top of that, we haven't seen huge reactions in gold to the various geopolitical risks that are brewing at the moment. There are tensions on the Ukrainian border with Russia. There's the ongoing frictions between the US and China over Taiwan. And of course, there is Iran's nuclear program. So unless we see a major escalation in any of these hotspots, gold probably won't benefit much from the geopolitical uncertainties.
On the other hand, oil prices rallied in 2021, Rafi, driven mainly by the global economic recovery. Do you think elevated oil prices will be a theme in 2022 as well?
Well, we've seen a bit of a pullback in oil prices over the past months, but for the year as a whole, oil is still up more than 50%. This rebound has mainly been on the back of the global vaccination rollout, which has allowed economies around the world to reopen safely, even as the pandemic rages on. Now, the Omicron variant does pose some risks because for the winter months, at least, it's looking like demand will be less than anticipated, and this will probably weigh on oil prices for the first few months of 2022. In some places, like in Europe, we had fresh lockdowns even before Omicron came into the picture, but the evidence so far suggests that Omicron is not more dangerous than other variants, so there is optimism that growth will rebound later in the year. So as long as OPEC stick to their cautious approach to increasing output, oil prices should stay fairly supported. It's also worth pointing out that the supply boost in non-OPEC countries has so far been modest because the current level of oil prices are still not high enough for some high cost producing countries. But whilst we could see the rally in oil resume at some point in the coming weeks or months, and demand shouldn't be too badly affected from the Omicron outbreak, in the bigger picture, the outlook for oil is questionable because we now have this global shift towards green energy, and that will limit how far future rallies can go.
And before I let you go, Rafi, what would you suggest are the biggest risks for commodities in 2022?
Well, I guess the biggest risk is the pandemic itself at the moment. Most commodity prices are still benefiting from this pent-up demand due to the reopening of major economies and all the stimulus from governments and central banks that has really strongly boosted consumption. But with both fiscal and monetary stimulus waning over the next year, demand could weaken. And there's also the threat of fresh mutations of COVID that could force new tight restrictions. We're seeing a bit of that already. So although the general outlook for commodities is quite positive for 2022, and we should see some further gains for key commodities such as oil and copper, we shouldn't forget that the pandemic isn't over yet, and there are a number of geopolitical risks as well that could explode at any moment.
Rafi, thank you for joining me today, and thank you for watching this special report on the commodities outlook for 2022 here at XM.com.